Welcome to the League of Women Voters Tacoma-Pierce County General Election Candidate Forum for the Legislative District 31, Senate and House Position 1. I am Lydia Zepeda, and my co-moderator is Zubel Perez. And on behalf of the League of Women Voters of Tacoma-Pierce County and our community sponsors, we welcome the candidates and the audience to this Community Candidate Forum.
The League of Women Voters Tacoma-Pierce County acknowledges that we gather on the ancestral lands of the Coast Salish peoples. Surrounded by their traditional waters in the shadow of Mount Tahoma, we actively seek inclusive and respectful partnerships that honor Indigenous cultures, histories, identities, and current realities.
The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization whose mission for the past 100 years has been to empower informed and active participation of citizens in government. Candidate forums are one of the many ways that we do this. Anyone who's 16 years or older can be a member of the League of Women Voters. For more information on membership, go to our website, lwvtpc.org. That's lwvtpc.org.
The candidates in ballot order for the Legislative District 31 Senate are Phil Fortunato and Chris Vance. For Legislative District 31 House Position 1, they are Holly Stanton and Drew Stokesbury. The general election is November 8th. If you are not yet registered or have moved, you may register or change your address online at votewa.gov. Again, that's votewa.gov by Monday, October 31. If you are already a registered voter and your address is correct, your ballot will be mailed out October 21st. Your ballot must be postmarked or placed in a ballot drop box by 8 p.m. Tuesday, November 8th. This forum is being recorded and will be posted at the League of Women Voters Tacoma-Pierce County website, lwvtpc.org. Questions have been prepared by members of the League of Women Voters of Tacoma-Pierce County and our co-sponsoring organizations. We invite live audience questions via text or call to number 253-306-6661. Again, that is 253-306-6661. Questions must be directed to all candidates and may be reworded or consolidated.
Our timekeeper today is Terry Baker of the League of Women Voters of Tacoma-Pierce County. She will hold up cards to let candidates know that they have 60 seconds remaining, 30 seconds, 15 seconds, and when it is time to stop. When the candidates see the stop card, they may finish a short sentence. Please stay on gallery view so that you can see the timekeeper and Terry Baker. Please do not talk unless it's your turn. And please stay on mute. And the audience cannot use the chat function. A reminder that civility is expected and that we ask you that you agree to the ground rules and show this by designating a thumbs up that you agree to our ground rules. May I see that from the candidates? Thank you. Appreciate that.
Each candidate has up to 2 minutes for an opening statement. After that, the order of questions will rotate and each candidate will be asked the same question. At the end, each candidate can make a 1-minute closing statement. The order of the opening 2-minute statements is ballot order. Chris Vance, Holly Stanton, Drew Stokesbury. Thank you all.
Go ahead, Chris Vance.
Great, thank you. And thank you for having me here again tonight. Thank you for the League for doing what you've always done and done so well. I'm coming to you tonight from my home in downtown Sumner. This is home for me and my wife, and this is where I grew up. Graduated from Sumner High School about a mile from here in class of 1980. Went to Western Washington University, and then really, at a pretty young age, went into politics. I represented this district 30 years ago in the House of Representatives as a Republican. I then was elected to the King County Council as a Republican. I was the chairman of the Washington State Republican Party and the Republican nominee for the United States Senate. And in 2017, I left the Republican Party, but I'm not comfortable in the Democratic Party either. I am running as an independent. I consider myself to be a moderate. and I'm seeking to be the first independent ever elected to the Washington State Legislature. And I'm doing this because partisanship and extreme positions are at dangerous levels in our political system. I think both parties are often wrong. And we have gotten too far away from the center in terms of all sorts of issues in this state, from personal rights and freedoms to funding for education, to crime and everything else. And the two parties are not representing us. I think that electing at least one moderate centrist independent would make a big difference on the floor of the state Senate. And that's what I hope to achieve, and look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Holly Stanton, please.
All right. Thank you for sponsoring this forum. I'm glad to be here. I love this community. I've raised my kids in this community. I'm proudly running for the first time for office. I was born and raised in Washington State. I've lived in the 31st now for over 20 years, and with a few exceptions, I've lived my whole life in the state of Washington. And I went to college here, except for law school, and I run a small business here, and I employ locally here. And I met my husband in this area. We chose to raise our kids here, and they have now graduated from high school and they're on their way to college. I've always believed that it is our civic duty to give back to the community. When the children were younger, I volunteered at their schools. I volunteered as a Girl Scout troop leader, as a Boy Scout den leader, first co-leader, then a full leader. And now that my kids have graduated, I want to put my time into other areas and help the community out. And so that is why when the Democrats said we don't have anyone running in the 31st, as a Democrat, I said, you know what, it's time, and I'm going to step up and do it. And so I am asking today for support from everyone that's here to get elected, and I'm looking forward to that. Thank you.
Thank you. Drew Stokesbury, please.
Yeah, well, once again, echo Holly and Chris in thanking the League of Women Voters for putting this on. It is absolutely critical for people in a functioning democracy to have a choice, but also to have an informed choice. And so really appreciate League of Women's Voters' roles in helping to ensure that that happens. My name is Drew Stokesbury. I've had the privilege of representing the 31st District in the State House of Representatives since 2015. I am nearing the end of my 4th term and running for re-election. I am a lifelong Washingtonian, was born and raised in the South Puget Sound, graduated from a local public high school, moved to Auburn, Washington right after graduating from college, and with the exception of 3 years of law school, have lived here ever since. Down in Olympia, I was elected to the House Republican leadership team during my 2nd term in office. And at the start of my 3rd term in office, asked to take the lead of the House Appropriations Committee from the Republican side. So for the past 2 terms, I have been the ranking Republican on the Budget Committee and been the lead Republican trying to reduce unnecessary state spending and keep taxes under control. I'm running for re-election to make sure we continue to have great schools, our community becomes safer and can remain safe. And make sure that our economy continues to do well and provides access to good paying family wage jobs. In my reelection, I'm endorsed by both of the state's major newspapers, the News Tribune and the Seattle Times. I'm endorsed by practically every statewide police organization there is in the state, as well as the State Council of Firefighters. I'm endorsed by labor unions and business organizations and community groups like Hunter's Heritage Council. And Affordable Housing Council. Would be honored to have your vote and look forward to talking about some of the issues tonight.
Thank you. Now we come to the questions. Each candidate gets up to 90 seconds to answer each question. For some questions, we may indicate that you only have 60 seconds. Again, live audience can call, sorry, we said text, but call to 253-306-6661. So phone call to 253-306-6661 if you have questions for the candidates. I'll leave that up. The candidate order will change. So for question number 1, we'll start with Holly Stanton. Washington State's tax structure is the most regressive in the US, meaning that Washington families with low incomes pay the highest percentage of their income in state and local taxes, while those with high incomes pay the lowest. What measures would you support to make the state tax structure more equitable and less regressive? Holly Stanton, please.
That's an excellent question. We do need to provide for our neighborhoods, and we need to build back our middle class. And the best way to do this is through a fair taxation. And the top has had way too many tax breaks, while the middle class has been left holding the bag. And obviously we need public services and we have to pay for them, but how we pay for them is different depending on if you're a Democrat or a Republican. Republicans in general favor tax breaks for the rich and cuts to social safety nets. And Democrats like myself, we want to make sure that we have a more progressive tax system, that those who have benefited the most from society and being able to run companies and profit from them should have to pay their fair share back into the community to take care of the system. We hear all the time lately, especially about the super rich flying to the moon and having 2 yachts, not just one to service the other yacht, writing checks for Twitter while barely paying any taxes. Elon Musk went from 25 billion in wealth in 2020 up to 255 billion in wealth in 2022. While hardworking middle-class Americans are struggling and should not be having to pay the bulk of the tax burden. And so what we need to do is make a fairer tax system. And that's one of the things I plan on doing if elected. Thank you.
Thank you. Drew Stokesbury, please.
Well, appreciate the question. I don't have to make promises. I can talk about things I've already done in Olympia. In 2008, at the start of the Great Recession, the legislature passed a law called the Working Families Tax Credit. It was an idea to give low-income families in Washington a rebate on sales taxes that they paid. It was a great idea in theory, but the legislature never provided the funding for it, so it only existed on paper. Nobody actually got refund checks. At first, it was sort of out of necessity. The state was making lots of other cuts. They didn't have a lot of money for a sales tax rebate, but as the economy recovered from the Great Recession and our tax collections grew dramatically, the state budget has doubled since I got elected, the majority in the legislature still would not fund this credit. 2 years ago, every single conversation like this I talked about how I was going to go to Olympia for the next term and make sure this got funded, and it did. It made a lot of people upset, drove a big hole in the budget that the majority wanted to spend on other things, but we got it done. It was the only meaningful tax cut delivered to the people of Washington in the past session, and it was funded for the first time in the program's 15-year history. And I'm proud to help make that happen. I think in terms of other changes we can make, we can address the B&O tax, which is a huge reason for the state to be rated as regressive as it is. We also need to look at the excise taxes that also make our state's tax system more aggressive. There's 2 ways to solve a regressive tax code. You can raise taxes on the high end, or you can cut taxes on the low end, and count me firmly in favor of those who say that we should make it fair by cutting taxes on those who have the least among us.
Thank you. Chris Vance, please.
Yeah, the premise of your question is exactly right. Our tax code is grossly unfair. The less you make, the more you pay as a percentage of our income. We've had this problem for, 50, 60, 75 years. There's a lot of things we do right in this state. We also have some really big problems. Our tax code is absurd. There are certain things that government does that are very well funded. There are other things that are starving. Our schools are still way too dependent on local levies. Our county governments, in terms of their general fund services, including law enforcement, are hemorrhaging. They can't hire people. The only way we're going to fix this is comprehensively with a grand bargain. We need, instead of piecemealing this, passing a capital gains tax here or doing a little change to the B&O there, what we've got to do in this state is get everyone around the table, Republicans, Democrats, business, labor, environmentalists, tribes, every major stakeholder, and renegotiate how we deliver services in this state and how we fund them. And it's going to have to involve a grand bargain with everything on the table, where we perhaps make our tax code look more like other states' tax codes, broaden the base, make it more fair. But it's an enormous problem. And I'm going to do my best to start this dialogue. But really, we need to elect a governor at some point who will make this the centerpiece of what he or she wants to do, because we need to massively restructure Washington state government and how we pay for it.
Thank you.
Thank Moving on to the next question. If elected, what are your budget priorities and how would you pay for them? Drew Stokesbury, please.
Well, thank you. I am one of the only people in the entire state who has played an integral role in writing a state budget. Typically, you don't see the minority caucuses in Olympia releasing their own full-fledged budget proposal because it's a lot of work and it opens you up to a lot of criticism because it is easy for somebody to, with $64 billion being spent, it is easy for people to say you're spending too much. It's easy for people to say you're spending it on the wrong things. There's a lot that can go wrong. But despite that political risk, 2 years ago, I became the first Republican in about 10 years to release a budget from the minority caucus. So have gotten very familiar with our state's budget process. I think some of the biggest things we need to continue to make investments in is special education in our K-12 system was, I think, the biggest area that was left unaddressed after the McCleary reforms. We also need to continue to invest in mental health needs, and we need to continue to invest in restoring salmon runs. Those are some areas that I've helped lead the way in and get support from the Republican caucus for. Been proud of some of the progress we've made. But the next couple of years are going to be difficult because either we're going to see tax collections go down if we enter a recessionary period, or we're going to see expenditures go up because inflation is rising, and that will cause a lot of other costs to go up as well. So either way, we're going to have some difficult budget choices ahead of us. But one of the reasons I want to go back to Olympia is to make sure there are experienced folks able to have those difficult conversations and make those difficult decisions.
Thank you. Chris Vance, please.
So budgets are the centerpiece of what government does. I served on the House Appropriations Committee. I served every year on the County Council's Budget Committee. I was the chairman of the Budget Committee, and so wrote probably the second biggest budget in the state of Washington after the state's budget. Budgets are about choices. And my choice is always going to be education. It is the state's paramount duty. It's our future. It's the number one thing we need to do. We are not fully funding basic education. The state legislature took a couple steps forward on meeting the McCleary mandates from the Supreme Court, but they have not gone nearly far enough. School funding is still uneven across the state. Special education is unfunded. So my top priority is always going to be fighting for dollars for K-12. My second priority is going to be something that very few legislators are talking about, and that is helping our county governments. Too many county governments are really struggling, and the big counties, and especially the small counties. Tonight in Washington state, 13 of our 39 counties will not have a sheriff's deputy on duty because they can't afford it. The state has got to provide better funding for our county governments to provide basic services. Now, we don't need to raise taxes. Revenues have doubled in the past 10 years. Surpluses are not going to be nearly as large as they have been, but the state is still looking at a surplus in the next biennial budget. So it's all about fighting for those available dollars while we try and do the restructuring that is the permanent fix that I talked about in the last question.
Thank you. Holly Stanton, please.
All right, thank you for the question. We've already talked a little bit about tax restructuring, but even with the tax restructuring currently, we have a surplus in the budget. So we have the ability to do the things that we need to do that take care of the citizens of our state. So as far as priorities, definitely the environment is a priority for me. We need to start taking steps to protect the environment before we start having the serious problems that the science has told us is coming. We've been told ever since I was very young that this is, the future, climate change, and that we need to do something about it. And so I would want to make that a high priority. Schools, definitely a high priority, and they should be fully funded by our state. We certainly have the ability and the financial ability to do it, and we should do it. We also need to make sure that we have satisfactory, well-trained police out there to take care of the citizens of the state. And we need to make sure that we're taking care of the other concerns that are coming out right now with homelessness and increased crime, that we need to have sufficient police officers to help with that. But also on the homelessness front, we need to make sure that we have housing for these people, that we have resources for them, that we have mental health services available to them, because quite often homelessness, it is a product of mental health issues. It is a product of poverty. So having those safety nets in place for all of those types of people is very important. Well, that covers the main ones anyway, but there's a myriad of them. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question. Current Washington law promotes access to affordable, high-quality sexual and reproductive health care, including abortion and contraception, without unnecessary burdens or restrictions on patients or providers. What is your position on these protections for abortion and contraception, and would you vote for any change? Chris Vance, please.
So while following the ground rules, I will say that this is one of the biggest differences between myself and my opponent in this race. My position on abortion has never changed as long as I've been in public life. And that is that we all have deeply held personal or religious views about this issue. But as a matter of public policy, Washington is the only state in the nation where the people made our abortion laws by a vote of the people in 1971 and by a vote of the people in 1991, codifying Roe v. Wade as the law of the state of Washington. It would be arrogant and wrong for 147 politicians in Olympia to make changes to something that personal and that sensitive. So I am very firm on this. I will not vote to change our state's pro-choice laws. In fact, I will vote to strengthen them to meet, I think, what is the will of the people of the state of Washington to keep this a pro-choice state. Now that the Supreme Court has decided that stare decisis and precedent doesn't matter anymore and has overturned themselves when no one thought that would actually happen. This is going to be an enormous issue. It will be debated in Olympia because there'll be some members who are going to force this debate. And people need to know that I will stand 100% in favor of our current pro-choice status as a pro-choice state.
Thank you. Holly Stanton, please.
Right. Thank you. The Supreme Court is wrong in throwing out 50 years of case law for political and religious reasons. And people have a fundamental right to bodily autonomy and the right to choose if and when to grow their family, and that should be protected. I would support amending the state constitution to further protect this right. And I don't know what's going to happen at a federal level, but there are a lot of concerns right now that things could go in a very dangerous place for protecting this right. And so whatever we can do here to firm that up and protect that right, I would do. Thank you.
Thank you. Drew Stokesbury, please.
Well, appreciate the question. I consider myself pro-life, but I also consider there to be a lot more policies which can be pro-life than simply the abortion question. I mentioned a few minutes ago, I was integral in helping pass the Working Families Tax Credit. I consider that to be pro-life legislation. The more children you have, the higher your tax credit is. I helped work across the aisle and across the rotunda. That's how we describe the Senate in the House. Worked with House Democrats and Senate Republicans and Democrats to extend Medicaid coverage to postpartum mothers, which I also consider to be pro-life. The simple fact of the matter is, no matter what the governor wants to fearmonger, there is no bill that is coming to the floor that is going to curtail abortion rights in Washington. It just isn't going to happen. So I don't think anybody needs to worry about that. I think what I'm focused on and what I hope as many people as possible will focus on is reducing the number of abortions that take place. If you look at opinion polls, there are only very few people that oppose abortion in all circumstances and very few people who would be in favor of abortion in all circumstances. The vast majority of people are content with some level of regulation. Exactly where that line is remains to be seen, but that'll be debated. But in the meantime, I don't think anybody in Washington state has anything to fear about their access to abortion. But I do hope others will work to reduce the number of abortions that take place.
Thank you.
Next question. What is your position on universal health care for all in Washington state? Holly Stanton, please.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that question?
Sure. What is your position on universal health care for all in the state of Washington?
I know that there are some people who work with particular jobs like Boeing or retired state employees, and they want to retain their private insurance. And so I can't see mandating something that would take that away. But I do want to see a public option across the state for anyone who wants to buy in, no matter what their income level. No one should be without insurance. No one should have to pay the private high rates where the CEOs there are making billions of dollars a year to say no to us on insurance. We should have this state option where we can get in. Some people feel trapped in their jobs because the insurance is there and they don't want to leave their job, maybe open up their own company out of fear that they're going to be without insurance, and the costs of that are so substantial. And so it's very important that we keep that option, and then we keep it for all people. I mean, we want to encourage business in this state of all kinds and getting people to grow and open that up. And one of the best ways we can do that is not make healthcare the factor that keeps them from doing it. So I hope that answers it. Thank you.
Thanks. Drew Stokesbury, please.
Well, I think the idea of universal health care sounds really appealing. I think it breaks down a lot in practice. Whether we're talking about health care, housing, or a gallon of milk, the laws of supply and demand exist and they operate. So simply guaranteeing everybody a right to health care certainly solves some problems, but it creates just as many problems because they're also you have to have the ability to provide that health care. And simply mandating it doesn't do anything about creating the provision of healthcare. It doesn't do anything about making drugs more affordable. It doesn't do anything about solving the severe nurse staffing shortage that we have. I think there are better tools and better mechanisms to make healthcare more affordable and more accessible. It's a really complicated area. It's made more complicated by the federal government. But I think there are some better tools at our disposal to try to bring healthcare costs down than guaranteeing universal coverage. I think Washington State has made some strides in this area. Obviously, more work is left to be done, but I would not support a universal healthcare mandate.
Thank you. Chris Vance, please.
So I have never supported a single payer universal healthcare program that precludes the option of private or employer provided healthcare. I voted against that way back in 1993 when I was in the House of Representatives. But I agree with the concept that we have to have universal healthcare access. I cannot imagine raising kids or living at all in this society without health insurance. What we have done in this state is continuously take steps forward to provide a public option for people who are too young for Medicare, too well off for Medicaid, but don't have private or employer provided insurance. The first step was the basic health plan way back in the late 1980s. And then there was Obamacare, and we have expanded that. The way we're going to get there is by continuing to close that gap so that everybody is eligible for a public provided sliding fee scale of health insurance that is high quality. I even think that people who have a really bad plan from their employer should be allowed to opt into the government system if it's better, because we have to make sure everybody has good health insurance. But to do that, you don't need to take good health insurance away from people who are very happy with their healthcare plans, as most teachers and nurses and public sector employees and others are, and large employers. So yes, we need to make sure everybody has access to health insurance, but not through a single payer top-down system.
Thank you. Next question. What legislation do you support or propose to address substance abuse and mental health issues? Drew Stokesbury, please.
Well, again, appreciate the question. And one of the advantages of having served for several years is I don't just have to make campaign promises. I can point to my record. I mentioned a few minutes ago that I helped put together a budget proposal that dramatically increased the amount of funding for mental health beds, and importantly, mental health beds in the community rather than continuing to send folks to Eastern or Western State Hospital. I forget the exact numbers at this point now, but it was something like 2 or 3 times as many beds would have been funded in my proposal compared to the governor's budget. We need a lot more investment in mental health to provide the care that people in our community need. And I've been very disappointed with how poorly the governor has managed Eastern and Western State, and how poorly and slowly he has led the transition from Eastern and Western State to mental health care in the community. In terms of substance abuse, I also favor continuing to make more investments in substance abuse, substance prevention, drug court, things like that. I am very disappointed that the state Supreme Court essentially legalized all hard drugs. I don't think that continuing the approach we took in the 80s and 90s by itself is wise, but nor do I think it's wise to say that there should be no consequences whatsoever. I think we need a balanced approach where we have treatment options for those who are willing to take it, but incarceration as a necessary backstop to make sure folks have an incentive to go and get the treatment they need. Otherwise, I think we're inviting a mountain of problems.
Thank you. Chris Vance, please.
So this is an issue of funding, I think, and resources, not so much legislation. Although I would oppose legislation to make personal possession of hard drugs legal, which some people are supporting. You know, I've been very public about saying I'm not a Republican anymore, but issues like that are why I'm not a Democrat either. I don't believe society should countenance people having, you know, personal use of drugs like heroin and fentanyl and others. That's just abandoning the problem. But we've got to put more resources into it. I said before that my number one priority was education, and then funding for county governments, and a close third behind that has got to be mental health, behavioral health, substance abuse. It is a matter of capacity, not having enough beds, not having enough doctors, not having enough treatment, to the point where recently the King County executive and the mayor of Seattle and a bunch of other community leaders announced that they're going to put a $1.25 billion property tax measure on the ballot to fund a massive expansion of behavioral health services and substance abuse services. That's great. I applaud their leadership, but local government should not be doing that, and it shouldn't be done on the backs of taxpayers with our property taxes. The state has got to step up and do much more to provide the infrastructure we need to provide the services we need to get this problem under control.
Thank you. Holly Stanton, please.
All right, thank you. With regards to mental health, I'm in agreement with Mr. Vance that it is a budgeting issue more than anything else, that we have a lot of programs that are out there, and it's mostly getting the budget for them so that we can get the services that those who unfortunately have mental health issues need. As far as substance abuse legislation, I am a more moderate Democrat, and I am questioning whether or not this wholesale making it legal to possess is a good idea, because what we have seen is an increase in crime. There's an increase in people who are unfortunately dying from overuse of the drugs. And it's just really not gotten us to where we need to go. I understand some of the reasoning behind why we got to where we got, but I think we'd be better off. It doesn't have to be felonies, but getting them into the court system. If nothing else, they get a night sober inside the jail, and that in and of itself could help change their life around. But you can also offer them plenty of different programs like drug court, which has been proven to do amazing things to help people turn around their lives and decrease the rate of recidivism as far as criminal actions that they would choose to do while under the influence. So I definitely think that we need to start putting that back in place and getting those people the help that they need. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next question. What state legislation do you propose or support to address climate change and or climate induced disasters? Chris Vance, please.
So the state of Washington has been very aggressive in this regard. We have taken steps that very few other states have taken. The legislature has passed bills mandating clean fuel standards, basically a state version of cap and trade to bring carbon use down, mandating clean construction of buildings and clean energy. The state has been very aggressive in this regard. It's going to be interesting to see if it works. It's going to be interesting to see the effect it has on the economy and on gas prices. My position is we need to maybe take a pause and see how these new policies affect us Critics, for instance, say that the clean fuel standards are going to immediately lead to a huge increase in the gas tax. Okay, I don't know about that. Perhaps. Climate change is very real. I watched from my backyard the hill above Sumner burn in urban, wet, moist Pierce, urban Pierce County. We had a huge wildfire. The October we've just lived through has been like none other. We have to take climate change very seriously. And we have in this state. The legislature has done a lot recently. I think now we need to pause and see how these new policies work and what effect they have on our economy.
Thank you. Holly Stanton, please.
All right, thank you. This is an area that I feel very strongly about, because we have known that climate change is coming, and we have not done what we needed to do to make the changes. And now my children are going to have a much worse environment, and their grandchildren even worse than that, because of the choices that we've made over time. We need to promote electric cars. We need to promote wind power and solar power and give huge tax breaks so that it is almost like you're getting paid to put those things up in your home. It's going to help reduce our pollution. COVID has taught us one thing, that you can do some jobs from home. You can appear virtually for things like we're doing tonight. These things reduce the travel costs. 26% of our pollution comes from transportation. And so by doing some of these things virtually, you can't do everything virtually, but you can do a lot that can help reduce things down. Courts, there's still quite a few courts that go in and do this virtually, and they are helping to save, with all of the pollution. I am a long-term environmentalist, but I am also a realist. And I know that there's no perfect solution, but we have to look to the science, and we have to keep making as many of the steps and changes as we can do, offer as many tax breaks as we can offer, and do whatever we can here to protect the environment for future generations. I know that this has been a big issue that is a difference between Democrats and Republicans, because a lot of them, not all of them, but they deny science. They actively sabotage those things that we have done, like putting solar panels up on the White House. And I should stop. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Drew Stokesbury, please.
Well, I'm not a scientist. If I tried to read a peer review study of anthropomorphic climate change, I wouldn't have any idea what it was talking about, or be able to judge if it's right or wrong. So I'm happy to accept scientists at face value. The question for policymakers, like those of us running to represent you in Olympia, is what to do about it. And here, I don't think that Washington is the appropriate entity to be doing much of anything about it. In the course of this debate, China will emit more CO2 in the atmosphere than Washington State will emit in the entire year. We could shut the entire state down for a year and make up just a few minutes of what China emits into the atmosphere. We as a small state are just unequipped to deal with the scope of this challenge. This needs to be an issue for international cooperation. It should not be done on the backs of hardworking Washington taxpayers. Mr. Vance mentioned the low carbon fuel standard and some other efforts passed by the legislature. I opposed all of those. Estimates by the nonpartisan Washington Research Council suggest that in the next couple of years, the price of gas will raise by about 50 cents because of those policies. I don't think that Washingtonians, especially those of us who live in South King County and East Pierce County and have to commute into Seattle or Tacoma, should not only have to pay to commute that far, but also have to pay an additional surcharge on our gas tax because of it. I do not think that Washington taxpayers are the ones who should solve China and India and the world's problems.
Thank you. The next question, what legislation would you propose or support to address crime in your legislative district? Holly Stanton.
Thank you for the question. I think that we need to look at what are some of the biggest factors that cause increases in crime and what we can do to reduce that. One of them, as far as like homicides go, is access to firearms. Studies have shown that United States has one of the worst rates for mass shootings, and if you look at other states and or other countries and the legislation that they have done, you will find, that reasonable regulations like Canada, they ban fully automatics, they restrict handguns and semi-automatics, and they have longer waiting periods, and they have drastically less homicides than we have here in America. Australia, the same thing. They put in place bans on auto and semi-automatics and mandatory licensing, and they have even better rates for lower levels of homicides. And so there's definitely things there that we need to do. We also need to look at poverty issues, because wealth inequality is one of the other reasons why we have increased crime. The disparity between the rich and the poor, the more the disparity, the more it seems like there is crime in our area. And so we need to make sure that we have fair taxation so that there isn't this high amount of people who are in poverty, because it's when you're the most desperate that you'll do things that you might not otherwise do. When we've had periods of time where we've had great wealth through the middle class, we've had the lowest levels of crime. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Drew Stokesbury, please.
Yeah, I hear this issue talked about by voters far more than any other issue. Things seem to have gotten even worse in the past couple of years. I remember when I was in law school, so about 10, 15 years ago, I saw somebody walk into Fred Meyer, grab 2 handles of vodka and just walk straight out the store. And I could not believe the gall of this individual. Everybody just sort of looked on in awe, and it was so crazy to me that I proceeded to tell everybody about this for the next year. Well, now that happens, and it's just another Tuesday at Fred Meyer, and nobody even bats an eye. That's how ordinary it is. That's unacceptable. And the solution to petty theft and catalytic converter theft and home robberies is not to raise taxes and make our tax code more fair. It's not gun control. It is to charge criminals for their criminal behavior, put them in jail, enforce the law, and let police do their job. Virtually every Democrat in the state legislature voted for bills that made it harder for police to do their job, made it harder for prosecutors to prosecute criminals. I oppose all those bills, and when I go back to Olympia next session, I will work to undo as many of those as possible. We need to give law enforcement the tools to pursue suspects that they have in almost every other state, and we need to make sure that criminals who steal catalytic converters and engage in other criminal behavior are held accountable for their criminal actions.
Thank you. Chris Vance, please.
I agree with everything Representative Stokesbury just said. I also agree with him when he said it's the #1 issue out there. I hear it every night when I'm out ringing doorbells. The Democrats have really gotten crime wrong, which is why they're losing the trust of suburban voters to a large degree. Lawlessness just leads people to not trust anything in our society or anything in our system. People want the laws enforced. And yes, the Democrats went way too far in passing what they termed reforms that really tie the hands and change the practices of police officers out in the field. But there is something else that's, I think, even a bigger issue, and that is that we are not providing enough financial support to our county governments, which provide the criminal justice infrastructure. County prosecutors, county jails, county sheriff's departments are all massively understaffed, and they were understaffed before the pandemic. The Pierce County Sheriff's Department did a study several years ago that showed they were 1/3 understaffed. You can't just prosecute everybody and put them away when you don't have enough prosecutors. You don't have enough corrections officers to adequately staff the jail. You don't have enough police officers to investigate property crimes. You can only investigate murders and rapes. The state has got to do much more to help counties dramatically increase the funding for criminal justice to enforce the law. I have some ideas about that, but I don't have time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Candidates will have 60 seconds to answer this question. If elected, are you willing to vote against your caucus to implement the goals and priorities you are expressing tonight? Drew Stokesbury, please.
Yes, I have voted on bills that the vast majority of my caucus opposed. I have what I have enjoyed doing more the last couple of years, though, is persuading my caucus to change their mind about things. We had a pension funding bill that came through the Appropriations Committee several years ago. Every Republican, including myself on that committee, voted no. I met with the prime sponsor who explained to me what the bill was trying to accomplish and why it made sense. And I realized I was wrong and went back to the caucus and got everybody to vote yes, including 14 other people besides myself who had previously voted no on the same bill. I've mentioned the working families tax credit. When the policy was passed in 2008, I don't think a single Republican supported the policy. They felt that tax cuts should be broad-based, and they're not wrong. But when it came time to funding the policy in 2021, I convinced them all that even though it would be better to give everybody a tax credit, giving some people a tax credit would be better than giving nobody a tax credit. And all but one House Republican agreed with me and changed their mind from 15 years ago and supported the policy. So I'm happy to diverge from my caucus if necessary, but also will work as hard as I can to persuade people to see my line of thinking.
Thank you. Chris Vance, please.
Well, I'm going to be a caucus of one in the state Senate, so I'm probably not going to vote against my caucus. I'm being flip about that, but when I was a Republican, I often voted opposite a lot of other Republicans. I voted against the King County budget twice when my party had the majority. That wasn't a very popular thing to do, but it was a bad budget that raised property taxes when we didn't need to. So I voted against it. But in Olympia and in Washington, D.C., people are free to vote against their party. It happens all the time. We don't have a British parliamentary system where you're ostracized if you don't toe the party line. But the public believes that's the case. The public believes that the two parties enforce this doctrinaire discipline on their members. So again, I think this is why I, as an independent, can help change the entire atmosphere in the Washington State Senate, just as my friend Evan McMullin will be able to do that as an independent if he's elected in Utah. Electing a few independents would really shake up our system.
Thank you. Holly Stanton, please.
All right, the simple answer is yes. I will do what I think is best, what I've said I would do here, and what I think is best for the citizens of the state. So thank you.
Thank you. Next question will also be a 60-second question. How have you demonstrated your commitment to anti-racism? Give specific examples of working with marginalized groups. Chris Vance, please, 60 seconds.
Well, I guess one of the best examples is this is part of my duties on my job. I have a job. I'm the communications director for the King County Department of Assessments, and I'm in charge of both internal and external communications and other things. And I serve on the committee in terms of equity and social justice within our department, organizing training and seminars in order to bring this communication to our members and foster an atmosphere of tolerance and racial diversity. King County is named after Martin Luther King, and that government takes these things very, very seriously. And I have been part of the management team in the assessor's office promoting these efforts for the past several years. And it's very valuable and important, I think.
Thank you. Holly Stanton, please.
Thank you for the question. Being a small business owner, it's kind of a different scenario of how to answer that question than some of these other people who have more experience in politics. But I would support all legislation that is going to promote equity and social justice. And I have always felt that way in the way I've practiced, is that I would hire anyone who came into my office, no matter what their background, as long as they had the qualifications that they needed. So I've always felt that way ever since I was young, and that's what I would promote and support as a legislator. Thank you.
Thank you. Drew Stokesbury, please.
Appreciate the question. I'll try to give a couple examples like were requested. During my first term in the legislature, I worked closely with One America, an immigrants' rights activist group, and then State Senator, now Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, to pass a bill that allowed law enforcement agencies to hire non-citizens. It would still have to pass the same background check and everything, but state law until then had required them to be citizens. The Senator, now Representative Jayapal, and I helped change that law with the help of One America. I have a very close relationship with Washington's Native American Indian tribes, particularly the Puyallups and Muckleshoots, and have worked very close with them on a number of their priorities in Olympia. The one I'm most proud of is beating the state of Washington and the Liquor Control Board, who illegally tried to cite a marijuana store on tribal reservation grounds. And then lastly, during this past legislative session, I was a co-sponsor of a bill to make Juneteenth a state holiday and help make sure that the funding for it was provided in the budget, because believe it or not, that costs state money to pay state employees to take the day off. But it was an important thing to be done, was long overdue, and glad to help play a role in getting it done.
Thank you. And well, this will be the, why don't you give the last question next? Thank you. So number 10.
Okay, so moving on to our last question here. And this will be a 90-second question. What legislation do you propose to ensure affordable housing is available in your legislative district? Holly Stanton, please.
All right, thank you for that question. We do need affordable housing. Families, many of them live paycheck to paycheck, and if one thing changes, then they can find themselves homeless. And we need to have social safety nets in place that would help them get back on their feet and be productive members of society. It benefits all of society that we have the ability to give housing to all of our people. And it also shows what kind of community we are, that's what we would care about. And so as far as that goes, we are going to want to really take advantage of getting the budget there to cover the costs of housing low-income families, to make sure that they are building homes that can be afforded by people who earn smaller incomes, so that everyone has that right to have that American experience that we that many of us have grown up and appreciate, and that it helps just build our community. So I think the biggest part is going to be giving the budget to make sure that this is something that we can take care of. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you. Drew Stokesbury, please.
Yeah, I mentioned supply and demand once already today. I'll mention it again. The laws of supply and demand apply whether we want them to or not. If we want to bring down the price of housing, we need to build more supply of housing. The solution isn't price controls on how much rent can be charged. The solution isn't the government trying to be the ones to build housing. The solution is to unleash the private sector and let them build as much housing as possible, and that will bring down the price of housing. So I think there's two ways to do that. One is to incentivize cities and counties to change their zoning laws that rewards them in various ways if they permit more types of housing and more dense housing. The second is to provide developers and builders with tax incentives to provide affordable housing. There's been a number of bills that have gone through the legislature that either do this or come close to doing this, but haven't actually gotten all the way through. And I hope that over the next 2 years, we'll do some of it. But that's the solution. We've got some amazing builders. I'm proud to have their support in this campaign, who do amazing work and would be more than happy to build as many houses as state and local authorities would let them. We just need to change the law, and sometimes that means incentivizing the cities to change their own law. Sometimes that means offering financial incentives in the form of tax credits or tax deferrals to allow it to pencil out. It can be done. We just need the political will. I've got it, and I hope to work with enough legislators from both sides of the aisle next session to finally get it done.
Thank you. Chris Vance, please.
We need to continue to fund efforts to provide public sector housing and shelters to the homeless and people who need it. But the real answer is the private sector. We are going to be about 40,000 owner-occupied housing units short of our population goals over the next several years, as people continue to move to the central Puget Sound and housing has become ridiculously expensive because supply and demand are completely out of whack. The answer lies in the Growth Management Act. I voted for the Growth Management Act and in the legislature. I was the chairman of the King County Council's Growth Management Committee in the 1990s when we passed King County's comprehensive plan and countywide planning policies. I support the structure of growth management, which is to protect the rural area so we don't sprawl all the way out to Mount Rainier like Phoenix or Los Angeles, by maximizing growth in the urban area. We have got to get serious about that. We've got to get serious about infill development and ensuring that the cities take more growth, denser growth, and provide more owner-occupied private sector housing within the already occupied urban area, not up on the Enumclaw Plateau. I like it as farmland right now. And we can do that while still preserving local control of specific zoning decisions. But we're going to have to make some changes to the GMA because right now it is not getting us where we need to be in terms of housing supply.
Thank you. Now it's time for closing statements. Each candidate has up to 1 minute for their closing statement. We'll change the order of the opening statements, and so we'll start with Drew Stokesbury, please.
Well, once again, I will end how I began, which is by thanking the League of Women Voters for putting this on and inviting the community to join us. Appreciate everybody who sent in questions and appreciate those from the League of Women Voters who helped create some questions as well. You know, like I said, been very proud to represent the 31st district the past several years in Olympia and hope to return for another 2-year term. Very proud to be endorsed by virtually every major group there is in Olympia, both of the state's major newspapers, the state's largest business associations, labor unions, community groups like Hunters Heritage Council, Cascade PAC, veterinarians, physical therapists, you name it. Very proud to have their support to continue doing the work I've done on behalf of the people of the 31st down in Olympia. So appreciate you all hearing me. Look forward to having another 2 years to help improve our schools, make communities more safe, and create well-paying jobs. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Chris Vance, please.
Thank you again to the League of Women Voters for having me. It's unfortunate my opponent chose not to show up. This is a really important race. It's one of the 5 battleground races in the state Senate. And I'm proud to be endorsed by most unions in the state of Washington, teachers, public school employees, firefighters, nurses, and both major newspapers, the Seattle Times and the Tacoma News Tribune, which is pretty unusual when you're a challenger running against an incumbent. And I'd urge people to read the endorsements in the Seattle Times and the News Tribune, because I think they really sum up from organizations that are non-biased and civic-minded, the differences in this race. I love this country, I love this state, I love this district, but we are in trouble. Our political system is not functioning. Divisive and partisanship and extreme ideas are reaching dangerous levels. And I believe that electing some moderate independents who will shake up the 2-party system is one of the healthiest things we can do for our democracy. And I hope that'll start with the 31st district. Thank you.
Thank you. Holly Stanton, please.
All right, thank you for sponsoring this forum. And I'm here to ask for your vote. I love this community. I raised my kids in this community, and I want to do what I can to help this community to get the right laws passed, to get the right budget, to do fair taxing, to make sure that our freedoms are protected. And I'm looking forward to helping you if elected. Thank you.
Thank you. In ballot order, the candidates for Legislative District 31 for Senate are Phil Fortunato and Chris Vance. For Legislative District 31 House Position 1, they are Holly Stanton and Drew Stokesbury. Your ballot was mailed out on October 21st. Be sure to vote early and no later than November 8th.
We would like to thank the candidates who participated, the timekeeper Terry Baker, Tacoma-Pierce County League of Women Voters, and our community sponsors, the Affordable Housing Consortium, Asia Pacific Cultural Center, AAUW of Puyallup, Grid City Co-op, Latinx Unidos of South Sound, NAACP of Tacoma, Sumner Waller Community Association, the Tacoma Urban League, Vibrant Schools, and the YWCA of Pierce County.
You can see other League of Women Voter candidate forums at our website, lwvtpc.org, and read your voter pamphlet. Look at vote411.org, that's vote411.org, where you can find answers to questions posed to all candidates running for office. Read your candidate's website and do all that you can to be an educated voter. And don't forget to vote before November 8th. Thank you, everyone, and have a good evening.